Jeremy Corbyn, thanks for joining us and thanks for accepting that interview, first of all.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Jeremy, would like to start with an important question. What role is played by the UK political system in the conflict on Middle East as well as on Kurdish question? Let's start with that one shortly.
Well, on the overall question of the Middle East, I'm more than disappointed with the British government's role in all of this. The question of the recognition of Palestine goes back a long way. More than 10 years ago, on a non-binding resolution, the House of Commons voted to recognize Palestine. Since that time, this is before October 23, very large numbers of Palestinian people, including children, have been taken captive and held in prison in Israel. The occupation of the West Bank has continued, the settlement policy has continued, and the harassment of Palestinian villagers in Hebron and other places has continued. And people on the West Bank are growing up in a situation where they're under military occupation and have been for a very long time. Since October 23, after the events of that time, when the Israeli forces responded to the events then by a massive bombardment and occupation of Gaza, which has resulted in more than 60,000 deaths. And that has also increased the occupation intensity on the West Bank, and that has also resulted in many deaths. And indeed, that is continuing. Many of us have made the call that British governments should suspend arms supplies to Israel. And in the light of the decisions made by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, there is no justification, legally or otherwise, for continuing to supply arms to Israel, but they have. And whilst David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, did suspend some licenses, the crucial ones are the parts for the F-35 jets, which the supply of which has continued, and they've been used to devastating effect in Gaza. And so at every stage where we've demanded a ceasefire, the British government has been more than behind the curve and is still behind the curve on this issue. And so the demonstrations continue, the demands continue. And what we're looking at is acts of a genocidal nature against Palestinian people in Gaza, and of course the horrific activities of Israel as the occupying power of the West Bank, which is in breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is the one that regulates what occupying powers should do towards the people that are under their subjugation. So I think the British government has adopted a very bad position on this, has aligned itself very closely with Israel, and has not been a broker for peace. And we in Parliament are continuing demands that the Palestinian people deserve to live in peace, in justice, and with global recognition.
Well, of course, the Palestinian issue is getting worse and deeper day by day, and the UK policies, foreign policies, are highly effective on these negative developments. And we can clearly see that the UK supports Israel policies as well in this genocide. But how does all these chaos reflects to the Turkey and Kurdish issue? Very shortly, please, that one.
Again, with the question of the rights of Kurdish people, British activities which have not been generally supportive of Kurdish people go back a very long time to the attacks on Kurdish positions after the First World War in 1919, when Britain used aerial bombardment against Kurdish people in northern Iraq, and which was then there was the brief period of the recognition of a Kurdish state, which was then removed in 1923. And so Britain has always been inadequate in recognition of the language rights and the cultural rights of Kurdish people. Throughout the 1980s, after the 1984 decision of the PKK to mount military activities against the Turkish forces, Britain has been not particularly effective in speaking up for Kurdish people's rights. After the Halabja massacre of 1988, Britain was forced to at least recognize the way in which Kurdish people have been treated, in this case in Iraq, and later did recognize the Kurdish autonomous region of northern Iraq after the Gulf War of 1991. But to say that Britain supports or recognizes the rights of Kurdish people as a whole would be an exaggeration. Quite honestly, the British government doesn't. And I think that's the area of demand that we have to be making. The Kurdish people have been badly treated by all of the countries in the region where Kurdish people live. You're thinking here, Iraq, Iran, and obviously Turkey as well as northern Syria. Surely with the enormous changes that are now happening in Syria, and with the demands being made for Kurdish rights, there needs to be a period when the Western governments say to all of the governments of that region, you have to recognize the needs and rights of Kurdish people to their own self-identity. And that is something that, to my mind, has been sadly lacking. And as one who is very happy and very proud to represent a lot of Kurdish people in my constituency in Parliament, I feel their pain and I feel their demand for peace and for justice. And this is made every year at Nivroz. Now, the interesting statement made by the PKK more recently was a statement by Öcalan in which he said that the military activities of the PKK would cease and that they would seek a political way forward for the Kurdish people. Surprisingly, this wasn't accompanied by his release from prison, and he still remains in prison. And so surely the quid pro quo of the PKK suspending all its activities or ending all its activities should be the release of political prisoners. And I find it surprising that that hasn't happened.
Thank you, Jeremy. As you bring the topic to the Öcalan statement, I will continue from there and I will come back to the EU policies as well because we are expert with it. So, as you mentioned, Kurdish leader Mr. Öcalan has been visited by DEM party representatives, and also Öcalan's message was very clear, as you mentioned, and it was to the point. He was saying that if the ground is prepared, I have enough power to bring conflict to the peaceful negotiations table, and calling the PKK to lay down the arms and continue to the democratic struggle. How do you evaluate this message, just to make it a little deeper, and how important it is? Also, the Öcalan also proves that he is still on the peace side. How would you like to comment on that very shortly?
Well, many of us have been demanding for many years that there be rights of access to meet Öcalan in prison, and calling for his release as being an important gesture of leading towards a peace and recognition process. Eventually, visits were allowed to Öcalan, but he spent many years in isolation, if not in total solitary confinement. And then the dramatic statement came out recently in which he said the PKK was suspending its activities. I think if we take the parallel of Northern Ireland as an example, in Northern Ireland, the IRA said they would pursue a parallel policy where they would seek political as well as the military activity they were undertaking. Then at the time of the Northern Ireland ceasefire, there were two ceasefires, 1994, then another one in 1997. Both of them were accompanied by significant political progress, such as lifting of the broadcasting ban, the travel ban, and direct meetings with representatives of the Republican movement as a whole. And in 1997, when the second ceasefire came about, that was then accompanied after some months by the Belfast Agreement. And the Belfast Agreement then came to the decisions it did, which were about the establishment of a Northern Ireland Assembly, which was representative of all of the people of Northern Ireland. And there was a process for the release of prisoners and investigation of outstanding grievances. And so there was a comprehensive package put forward as part of the developing confidence building and peace process. What I find surprising is that beyond the statement made by Öcalan and the political demands that have been placed by him and colleagues in the Kurdish community, very little appears to have been offered or happened since then. And I want there to be peace. You want there to be peace. Everyone, Kurdish or non-Kurdish, wants to live in peace, but you have to recognize the diversity of all of the states in that area. And so it does mean recognition of the rights of representational recognition of Kurdish people. Surprisingly, none of this appears to have happened, despite the dramatic move made by Öcalan on behalf of his party.
Thank you. Just to finish the Öcalan's message conversation, Öcalan and the PKK now expecting a move from Turkey in a positive way, step forward, as you mentioned. So what is your call to Turkey very shortly, and what is your message for Öcalan and his workspace to be prepared freely so he can participate in the peace process?
My message is I recognize the historical importance of your statement. I recognize your desire to bring about a peaceful and political resolution to the many grievances of the Kurdish people and the Kurdish community. And all of us around the world that have long supported the need for talks with yourself as a representative of the Kurdish people, and indeed called for your release from prison, will continue making that call and continue making the demand that the Kurdish people's grievances and needs and rights be recognized on a global scale. And we will continue doing that, because I think you made a very important move and a very important statement there, which has to be responded to, because it is a big step for you to have made that statement. And I thank you for making it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just a couple of minutes more, please. Once I find you, would like to ask you that one as well, if you don't
Sure.
mind. Why does the European Union have a cold approach to the peaceful solution to the Kurdish question? There are also established opinions that the British state does not want a Turkish-Kurdish peace in the Middle East. And there is no clear support from UK government yet to the Öcalan's approach for peace. What is your assessment in this context, this frame? Very shortly.
The British state has never been supportive of Kurdish people or Kurdish recognition, and it's important that those of us that represent Kurdish people in Parliament continue to make those demands, and we will. A nation is happiest when it recognizes its diversity. Diversity is not a weakness, it's a strength. And I've never forgotten going to trials in Turkey of Kurdish people. For example, I remember going to the trial of the mayor of Diyarbakir, who was on trial for the use of the Kurdish language in Diyarbakir. And the trial was absurd at any logical sense, the way in which he was being treated and the way in which he was being charged. And so we will keep up those demands. There are many friends in the European Parliament and the Council of Europe and many other places where we will continue to make those demands for recognition. The European Convention on Human Rights guarantees the right of people to speak their own language, guarantees that right of diversity. And I pay tribute to those people that have regularly demonstrated outside the Council of Europe for those demands to be met. We'll continue making those demands. And I think we cannot underestimate the importance of the statement made by Öcalan recently, because it's a game changer in all respects. And it's an opportunity for Turkey to live in peace within its country, rather than this attempted isolation of so many of the Kurdish people's leaders.
Thank you so much, dear Jeremy Corbyn, well-known politician from UK. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your valuable comments. It's been an honor.
You're very welcome, and it's a pleasure to meet you, albeit online. Thank you.
Thank you.